who's going to be opening Zoom at the library.
Let me do here.
Okay.
Through the chair, we're live on HCAM going streaming on YouTube.
Okay. For anyone who might be watching, we are meeting was slated to start at 6 p.m., but we are just gathering. We have several committee members, including myself, joining remotely tonight. So it'll probably take us a couple extra minutes to get organized, both in the high school location and online. While we are still gathering, I should note, for the record, I was mistaken when I misspoke when I said the live location is at the high school. It is in fact at the middle school library. So just wanted to make sure I clarified that.
Just so you know, we're all here. We're just waiting for some hookup.
Okay.
Yeah, we're almost ready to start, John.
Okay. Carol, can you tell me who from the committee is in the room, just so I have a sense of if we're close to quorum? You're on mute if you're talking to me.
You're muted, yeah.
All right. So I have unmuted, but I think we have speakers. So hold on, I'm going to try
I
to mute
gotcha.
again.
Okay.
Okay, how about now? Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Yep.
Okay, very good. So in the room, we have Chris Everly and Dan Coley. I am here, two persons here, Susan Rothermick is here. Node from traffic is here. Mike and Bill Flannery.
Okay, Mike and Bill are there, and we have
They
Nancy is on virtually, and Jagroot, I see that you're on. Can you just confirm?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay. Well,
So,
with
and
that,
I know, sorry, I was going to say, I know Amanda is on her way.
Okay.
except I think she may be headed to the high school library.
Oh, hopefully that's not my fault.
Yeah.
Um, but that being said, so with Mike and Bill in the middle school library currently, and the three that we have joining virtually, as we're continuing to operate under the revised virtual meeting rules, we can begin because we do have a quorum. Before we begin and review the agenda, this is obviously a meeting that is being conducted partially remotely. I would note that I personally am remote at an airport, but I am in one of these lovely little private booths, so I am by myself. But also, Tiffany Ostrander will be joining late, and I will be leaving early, so I'll be handing off the facilitation of the meeting. But unfortunately, I do need to catch a flight. This was a very last-minute work trip that was unavoidable, so do apologize, but appreciate everyone's flexibility. So I will call the meeting to order with that at 6:06 p.m. Welcome everyone to the meeting of the Elementary School Building Committee for the Charleswood Elementary School. It'll take me a little while to get used to saying that, but I'll get there. I will quickly run through our agenda and then we can go ahead and get started. As soon as I find it. Okay, so tonight we will have our public comment period as normal. In terms of new business, we'll approve meeting minutes and invoices. We'll do an update on street improvements. We'll look at the current cost estimate and project budget updates, as well as the life cycle cost updates. We'll talk about proprietary items for the project. We will review and consider authorizing the submission of our MIPA and permitting submissions. And then finally, we will vote to do our detailed design submission to the MSBA. And we will look to adjourn, hopefully as close to 8 o'clock as possible. So with that, we can begin with the public comment period. I don't know if there's anyone in the room for public comment. I do see some members of the public on the Zoom. So if any of the people on the Zoom would like to make public comment, please go ahead and come off mute and I'll recognize you and we can go from there. Okay, Albert and Irina, I'm sorry, it's the name cuts. Oh, sorry, Albert and Irina Kassenhoff. If you could go off mute, feel free to comment.
Hi, we are from 149 Hayden Row, and essentially we just met with engineers about 10-15 minutes ago. And the question that we would like to discuss is the rationale of the pedestrian work on that essentially leads to nowhere. So what's the rationale? Why is it cutting into? Yeah, so I'm not sure.
He's got a limited cut like this.
So Albert, thank you for joining.
Sidewalk.
Just for the context of the public who may be viewing,
Question is,
as part of the traffic improvements, the impact of the street improvements to Hayden Row were flagged on Monday. And the butters were able to see the results of those, which we just walked with them prior to this meeting. One of the first things on the agenda tonight is a presentation by the traffic engineer. So it would probably be good if we walked through that presentation. And when we get to that area of the plan, we can expand on the reasons why, and then we can have a question and answer at the end. If that's all right with you, John.
Okay, makes sense.
Yeah, I think that would be fine. If there are no objections, we can somewhat extend the public comment portion so that Albert, if your question isn't thoroughly answered and you have a follow-up, we can entertain it at that point. But I agree with Chris. I think that makes sense. Chris, is there anyone in the room for public comment?
No, there is not.
Okay. I do see a couple other people who I can't identify. There's a phone number and a dot. So if you're interested in public comment, please come off mute and identify yourself. Okay, well, then we will move along. The next item on the agenda is the approval of meeting minutes. In your packet you will have had the meeting minutes from our last meeting that I just lost. From
Yeah, at the
March
last
12th.
meeting, you were unable to consider the minutes due to some of the difficulties you had with the Zoom, so they were tabled. So these are
Oh,
the
right.
same minutes for March 12th that were presented at that meeting.
So we have the minutes from the March 12th, 2024 ESBC meeting. Are there any questions or edits to those? Okay. Hearing none, I would seek a motion to approve those meeting minutes.
Mike Shepherd, I move that we approve the minutes March 24th as written.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, I have a motion by Mike and a second by Bill. We are a roll call vote because of our remote participants. I will start in the room. Mike,
Yes, sir.
Bill,
Yes.
Nancy,
Yes,
Jagroot,
Yes.
and I am a yes. So the meeting minutes are approved unanimously 5-0. Okay, next we've got some bills to pay. In your packet, you had an invoice package with 4 invoices to pay. One for Vertex Project Management in the amount of $34,263.99. That's invoice OPM 11624. For Perkins Eastman 00954210004 is the invoice number. Total amount of that invoice is $508,902.60. We then have 2 invoices payable to Lucas Environmental, invoice 23-372 and 23-431 in the amount of $50 and $330 respectively. Our total invoice package this evening amounts to $543,546.59. Are there any questions regarding the invoices?
For the committee's knowledge, Lucas Environmental is the peer reviewer for the Conservation Commission.
Okay, if everybody in the room but Chris could go on mute, just because we're getting some feedback. Okay, so again, so any questions on the invoices? Okay, hearing none, I would seek a motion to approve the invoice package in the agenda materials.
So moved. Second, sir.
Okay, motion by Bill, second by Mike. We are roll call again. Mike,
Yes, sir.
Bill,
Yes.
Nancy,
yes,
Jagroot,
Yes.
and I am a yes. So the invoices are approved unanimously 5-0. Chris, at this point, I will largely turn the agenda over to you to run, given the fact that it's all presentations, but I'll obviously drop back in for when we need votes, given that I'm kind of a bit remote here. You and Dan collectively, I guess, depending on who's talking.
So we have a couple of things that we wanted to go through tonight. As you all know, and just in case anybody didn't remember, we have retired the Elmwood name for the new school, and we are now the Charleswood School. So I put this helpful reminder at the top. So
We really appreciate the design on the slide. That's some top class PowerPoint work there.
So for tonight's meeting, we obviously just approved the meeting minutes and the invoices. Vinod from VHB is here with us tonight to present the development on the street improvements for Hayden Row. We're going to go over the cost estimate and provide a budget update on the various the reconciled cost estimates and where we are from an overall budget standpoint at the end of design development. We're going to touch on the life cycle cost update, which is a component of the DD report that we're going to be giving to the MSBA, but it's largely information that you've all heard before. We'll touch on and vote on the proprietary items that are the items that the town would like to buy proprietary because they already have an existing system or use where that is advantageous to the town. That requires a vote. We're going to give you an update on where we are with the MIPA and permitting submissions. And finally, we will ask you to authorize the chair to approve the final MSBA DD report, which is on schedule to be submitted to the MSBA this Friday. So with that, I will turn it over to Vinod.
Thanks, Chris. Is there a time limit on, like, or how many minutes do I have?
I think we have a time limit. It's up to the committee.
I have my timer on. If there is a time limit, I'll stop. Thank you, everyone. Again, my name is Vinod Kalikiri. I'm a senior transportation planner, traffic engineer with the firm of VHP. VHP has been the traffic engineer of record on this project, working with the Perkins Eastman Vertex team on the overall development plan. And as you may recall, last year through, I guess, most of the year, actually, we have had several conversations on traffic and transportation issues. There was a very comprehensive transportation study that we submitted back in July of last year, but then there were a lot more deep dive specific areas of traffic and circulation, both inside on the site as well as on Hayden Road Street, that we looked at all the way leading up to the town meeting vote. And one of the key things that came out of that whole process was the need to look at traffic flow and safety, both for vehicles as well as for pedestrians and bicyclists along Hayden Road Street, and how those conditions exist today and what we could do as part of this project, as part of the offsite improvements for the new school, what we could do on Hayden Road Street to help improve some of those conditions, in addition to offsetting the impact of the project itself. So that was a big piece of the analysis and the documentation we had prepared. At the town meeting vote, I believe leading up to those meetings, we did mention that we'll be revisiting this topic of the offsite traffic improvements on Hayden Road Street multiple times along the way before the project goes into construction. So this is, I would say, at least from my point of view, one of those first meetings where we get into a little bit more of a deep dive into the specifics of the offsite traffic improvements. I have a whole series of slides here. In the interest of time, I'll try to go through them as efficiently as possible, but feel free to interject or ask questions as you see fit. So the section of road that we're looking at and that we looked at even as part of our original traffic study is Hayden Road Street between Chestnut Street on the left edge of this graphic, and essentially the Grove Street signal on the right side. So that's about a mile-long stretch of Hayden Road Street, plus or minus. The school access are the two driveways, the one for the new school, Charles Wood School, as well as the existing driveway for Marathon School, are somewhere just approximately halfway along that corridor. It's about half a mile between the two signals is where those two driveways are today. Or the new driveway will be, and then right kind of next to it would be the existing Marathon driveway. The existing Marathon driveway obviously is an unsignalized intersection. Currently, it's controlled by a crossing guard during the peak times for students to cross the street, but also the crossing guard serves a double duty of facilitating traffic flow and buses turning into and out of the Marathon School during peak times so the traffic flows smoothly. So that was part of our study area. And we, if you can go to the next slide, please. So out of that process was again a very focused review of the intersection of the Marathon School driveway and Hayden Road. And the reason why we picked this intersection specifically is because it's already serving the Marathon School. And when you look at the site plan for the overall project for the new school, we are looking at a cross connection between the two schools. So traffic doesn't necessarily need to leave one driveway and access to the other school from Hayden Road Street. You could travel between the two schools via that internal connection. So what that internal connection does is provide the ability to provide additional traffic control at a location along this corridor that provides the most benefit for the traffic flow on Hayden Row Street. I mean, you could consider a signal only at the new school driveway. I mean, there are other technical limitations for doing that, but based on the analysis we did previously, we have determined that a change in traffic control at the Marathon School driveway would have the most benefit for traffic associated with both schools, while at the same time helping improve the traffic flow along Hayden Row Street and improve pedestrian safety. So one of the things that you see in some of the text on this graphic, I won't read all of that text, is that there is a lot of backup that happens whenever there's traffic turning into and out of the Marathon School, and that happens. That same thing happens at the Hopkins School driveway. It happens at the middle school curb cuts as well as the high school driveways. But in this instance, we are focusing on the Marathon School driveway. Whenever the crossing guard facilitates turning traffic or stops the traffic flow to allow pedestrians to cross the street, that immediately backs up traffic in both directions on Hayden Row Street. And there is an existing turn lane in the southbound direction for traffic that wants to turn into Marathon School. And currently, because there's only one school on the east side of Hayden Row Street in this graphic, that turn lane only supports Marathon School, and even that traffic is not fully accommodated. You constantly see that turn lane being exceeded by cars and school buses that try to turn into the Marathon School. And as soon as the queue backs up, the turn lane is exceeded, and the through traffic and the turning traffic spills into the through lane that backs up traffic, the through traffic that spills back to the Grove Street signal and beyond, quite often during those peak times. And especially when that congestion starts building up on Hayden Row Street, traffic exiting Marathon School will also have trouble. And as you would have noticed, there are fewer gaps in the traffic flow for traffic coming out of Marathon School to turn. So the manual intervention of the crossing guard occasionally during school buses or when there's an occasional pedestrian that wants to cross the street, in and of itself causes a lot of congestion at this intersection. It does spill up and down Hayden Row Street as well as up the driveway for Marathon School. And this is under current conditions. We go to the next slide. There are a few other things that we observed, and some of this is built into the traffic study that we submitted back in July of last year. Item A is what I just mentioned. The left turn lane is inadequate. Obviously, when there is growth in student enrollment for the entire district, there's close to a 50% increase in projected enrollment over the next 10 years. In Hopkinton, there will be more school-related traffic on Hayden Row Street, and there will be an increase in traffic just for Marathon School, and those future traffic volumes would need to be accommodated with anything that we come up with. The new school, again, based on our analysis, rather than just relying on a cross connection and access to the Marathon driveway, we established that there would be need for an additional access, an unsignalized access for the school. That was one of the things that we found with the traffic study. There's a need for pedestrians to have a more safe and convenient crossing opportunity across Hayden Row Street. Again, today the full signals are 1 mile apart at either end of this graphic. And so if a pedestrian needs to cross at the Marathon School today, they would have to activate the push button to get the flashing light on. It's not an active control in the sense that traffic just has to follow state law and yield to the pedestrians. There is no requirement for vehicles to stop. And quite often you see that happen, especially during off-peak hours. Traffic does travel at a higher speed along the corridor. The circle E that you see on the graphic is actually a cross traffic of buses between Hopkins School and Marathon School when school buses travel between the two schools to pick up and drop off students. Both intersections actually generate quite a bit of activity as crossing guards try to get the buses to travel between those two driveways under current conditions. that adds to the congestion. And then the traffic. And then the one thing that we have heard quite a few times during the traffic study process and the meetings leading up to the town meeting vote is the difficulty that a lot of the curb cuts, unsignalized driveways and the side streets, vehicles on those unsignalized side streets have in terms of turning into Hayden Row Street. And that's primarily because you have the through traffic flowing up and down Hayden Row Street without a lot of interruptions. There are very few gaps in the traffic flow for vehicles on the side streets to turn. And again, with the two signals 1 mile apart, there isn't really any significant break in traffic that's currently provided between the two signals. And that was identified as one of the main reasons for why there are fewer gaps in traffic, especially during peak times. So those are the types of issues that we identified and studied as part of our traffic analysis, and that formed the basis of our mitigation plan that we'll get into next. The next slide. So some of the other things that we took into account when we developed some recommendations as part of the traffic study are what's listed out there. For example, when you hear the concern that the school traffic is actually causing, that's the traffic that's causing some of the congestion and the backups. Actually, when you look at Charleswood School, or previously the Elmwood School traffic start and end times, that's not the time when traffic on Hayden Row Street peaks. Hayden Row traffic actually peaks earlier in the day, in the morning, and earlier in the afternoon, when the high school and middle school traffic is at its peak. So by the time the elementary school traffic comes out onto Hayden Row Street, it's actually the churning traffic in and out of the driveways that causes some of the congestion, not necessarily just the volume of traffic. So a solution that helps manage that churning traffic better would have a beneficial impact on the overall traffic flow on the corridor. The second bullet that talks about occasionally, off-peak hours, if there is a resident that's turning off of Hayden Row Street into a driveway or onto a side street, that would not have a significant impact. But as you have multiple cars, tens of cars trying to turn into each of these schools, that congestion does build up and the queues do spill out up and down the corridor, causing additional congestion. Crossing guards, as I mentioned, on the corridor, in addition to helping students cross the street, also help with traffic flow. That is not something that's desirable or should be done in general. Crossing guards are generally intended to serve pedestrian crossings and make sure that the students are crossing the street safely. But in this instance, they almost serve as traffic lights, helping, stopping traffic on Hayden Row Street, so traffic coming out of the driveways can enter and exit. We talked about the enrollment growth, close to 50% increase in overall traffic compared to current conditions. That's over the next 10 years, and we need to take that into account, which needs to be addressed both with physical improvements such as roadway widenings, increased turn lanes, but also traffic control changes that we'll talk about next. Just one of the slides of data from the traffic study itself. This graphic or this slide shows the amount of traffic that would be associated with the new school. The second and third grade traffic, that's traffic in 1 hour in the morning peak time of the new school, and then the afternoon peak time of the new school for grades 2 and 3. And added to that would be the fourth grade traffic that would be relocated from Hopkins School, for a total that shows up on the right edge of the column. Those numbers are pretty substantial. And those numbers, that's what we're trying to accommodate with our traffic improvements. And all these numbers that you see on this slide are future projections going out 10 years. So these are not the current numbers. These are future growth projections that includes that 50% growth in enrollment. Next slide, please. So the solutions that we've identified, and I'll get into more specific plan sheets, and what this graphic shows is, in addition to a series of improvements that we have developed in the site circulation on site, which are labeled as number 4 on that graphic, which is the internal cross connection, a roundabout controlling the intersection of the new driveway with the cross connection, and the circulating roadway around Charleswood School that can accommodate significant queuing, so none of these queues have, would spill back onto Hayden Row Street. In addition to that, we're looking at a series of improvements on Hayden Row Street, including a fully signalized intersection at the intersection of Marathon School Driveway and Hayden Row Street. That's number 5. And in addition to adding additional length to the turn lane that exists today, it's barely capable of supporting a few cars, 5 or 6 cars, and we would need more than that during each cycle of the signal to accommodate longer queues in the future. So there's some geometric improvements there. That turn lane would also be extended all the way down to the new school driveway, which is labeled as number 2. Then 1 would be the new school driveway itself that would have a right turn only restriction. So left turns, if you want to make a left turn coming out of the new school, the way to do it most efficiently would be to use the cross connection and use the traffic signal at Marathon School for making a left turn, which would be a lot more efficient than what vehicles do currently with an unsignalized intersection. And then operationally, I know the district has been making significant changes, planning significant changes to the school bus routes and operations, consolidation of routes that would help traffic flow as well along this corridor. Next slide. So, and I have zoomed in views of this graphic, but the plan that we developed for the corridor, that section of Hayden Row Street between, essentially I would say the new driveway and then a little past the existing driveway for Marathon School, a total length of about 1,600 feet of roadway is what is shown on this graphic. The light gray is the existing pavement. That's what is out there for the roadway width. And what you see in the dark gray is the new pavement. So those are the areas of the widening that we are talking about to accommodate the future cross section that we would need for Hayden Row Street to accommodate the future traffic flows and the turn lane lengths and other changes that we're looking at. If you go to the next slide. So to get a better understanding of what these improvements look like, we broke up the plan sheet into 3 different segments, 1, 2, and 3. So we'll just quickly go through each of those 3 areas. So segment 1 is near the new driveway, Chestnut Street to the left and Grove Street to the right of this slide. You'll see that it's a right turn out only driveway coming out of the new school. And then there is a new left turn pocket that's shown on Hayden Row Street that would keep traffic that wants to enter the new school outside of through traffic. So the through traffic would not be blocked by traffic that wants to turn into the new school. There would be essentially an added lane on Hayden Row Street on this section where it's shown as that cross-section line AA that's shown at 143 Hayden Row Street. You can actually see the cross-sectional view at the bottom with west on the left side of the graphic and east on the right side of the graphic. The house in pale green on the right is 143 Hayden Row Street. You'd actually see the proposed cross-section. There are 3 lanes of travel, 10 feet each, plus 4-foot shoulders along both sides of the road. Existing sidewalk remains untouched on the west side of that cross-section. And then the widening is shown on the right side with the utility poles that exist along Hayden Row Street that would need to be relocated when the roadway gets wide.
If you could just address Mr. Kostanov's question. There is this extension of the sidewalk. Mike and I walked before the meeting, and when you walk it, it really appears like a sidewalk to nowhere.
There's no sidewalk going down on that side of the road.
That is correct. So this is something that we met with the Public Works staff as well a few weeks ago to talk about these plans and concept, and that was something that came up even during that conversation. One thing I forgot to mention is that these plans are still what I would call as at the 10% level. So there's still a lot more work that needs to be done. We heard from Public Works saying, maybe there is no need to keep that, area of the sidewalk or the walking area that exists today because it doesn't connect to anything on the other side. But there may be other reasons to maintain it in case the town plans to extend that sidewalk in the future. But again, that green strip that's shown on that graphic, that that doesn't need to be there. The sidewalk or the asphalt can run right along the edge of the road, and you don't have that bump towards the property. But again, those are all finer details of the design that I would say we would get into as we advance the design. Again, right now we're at the 10% stage. The next step will likely be what we call as a 25% design, and then a final design. So I expect working with Public Works and feedback from neighbors similar to what we heard, what the group heard today, we'll be revisiting some of those areas and trying to minimize the amount of widening that we need to accommodate in that. That was our initial pass at it, but it could take a different form by the time it's done.
And Vinod, sorry, just to clarify too, operationally, when it comes to like pedestrians who might be leaving or coming to the school, again, that sidewalk just ends abruptly with nowhere to go, whereas that crosswalk would be sort of the pedestrian route coming out of the school. They'd cross, and then they have the sidewalk on the other side of Hayden Row.
That is correct. Yes, there
Okay.
will be push button actuated flashing beacons right at that crosswalk, similar to the flashing beacon that exists today at Marathon School. And that crosswalk is what really pedestrians would need to use if they have to go farther distance up and down the corridor. Again, the attempt, what we showed there with that yellow or tan color sidewalk, is to just restore an improved sidewalk section similar to what exists today. But if that's not something that the town is interested in keeping, that can be eliminated still without affecting the functionality of the pedestrian accommodations that we're designing.
Okay.
And if anybody happens to be walking this area, just for your own knowledge, each one of the spikes is labeled with what it represents. So if it's indicating a walkway, the spike is labeled walkway. If it's the edge of pavement, it's labeled edge of pavement. It's a relocated utility pole, it's labeled as such.
Thank you, Chris. Yeah, I think just to close the loop on this particular specific issue, it sounds like we need to continue that conversation with DPW, because if they agree that the sidewalk serves no functional purpose, it seems.
The other thing I also want to mention is that we've made every effort in this design to not encroach into private property with any type of takings or permanent easements. So everything that you see on the plans here can be done entirely within the public right-of-way. So the two blue lines that you see on either side of Hayden Row Street, that's the right-of-way of Hayden Row Street that the town controls. And you'll see that all improvements fit within that right of way or within the school property in the case of the driveway. But that said, again, if a section of sidewalk is not needed, there's obviously no need to maintain it, and that can be easily removed. The only thing that eventually, when you get into construction, that may come up is temporary access onto private property to be able to feather out mulch or landscaping. Tying up driveways into existing conditions. There might be loose ends that would need some type of a temporary entry onto property frontages, but there are no takings or easements, permanent easements associated with this project.
Okay, thank you. And just before we move off of this section, so I want to make sure we confirm, Mr. Kasanov, if that answered. I mean, I know it didn't fully answer your question in terms of the resolution, but the follow on here is we need to have a further conversation with DPW, and I don't think, while the committee hasn't discussed this in full, I don't think we have any. We don't want to maintain. We don't want to sort of we don't want to widen the road where we don't have to. So if that sidewalk has no functional purpose, we would certainly look at removing, and we could certainly look at removing that from the design, but we need that input from DPW first.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right, Vinod,
I'll-
appreciate it. If you can want to keep going.
Thank you. And then the only other thing I want to point out, again, this and the next couple of slides as well, is that the total width of widening, so the dark gray area that you see between the existing edge of the road and the new edge of the road is 10 feet or less. So that's the actual widening that we're looking at. It's order of magnitude about 10 feet. In some areas, it narrows down substantially as you get closer to the Marathon School driveway. Next slide, please. So this is the next segment going past that. So this is between house number 139 that you see in the bottom left to 134 on the top right. So that's the section where, again, the left turn pocket that we are proposing for the new school driveway, you see that being tapered out with the yellow hash marks that you see in the pavement. That's an area where you could theoretically extend the left turn pocket if needed, but we didn't feel that that area needs to be used for left turn at this stage, but it will be available if needed in the future. But then when you get to the Marathon School driveway, that's where you see, and I have a close-up view of that intersection, but that's where we would have the new fully actuated traffic signal with pedestrian traffic. Go to the next slide.
So can you just speak a little bit to the decisions that went into the lane width and shoulder width?
Sure. So the existing lane widths on the right edge of this slide today is about 10 feet. So the existing left turn pocket is 10 feet. The through lane is 10 feet, both in the northbound and southbound directions. And then the shoulders on either side, it ranges from 2 to 3 feet, 2 to 4 feet or so. So that's what the existing condition is on the north end of the corridor. As you go to the south end of the corridor where there is no turn lane, it's about 12-foot lanes, and again, about 2 to 3 foot, 2 to 4 foot shoulder. But what we try to do here, again, from a traffic calming perspective, is to make sure that we have a uniform, consistent width for the roadway, for the travel lanes. So rather than jumping between 10 feet, 11 feet, 12 feet for different sections of the road, over 1,600 feet of road, which is not really that long if you're driving a car in this corridor, we chose to keep on the plan, we kept the 10-foot lanes through the steady area. And again, that provides a traffic calming mechanism where vehicles would not have the full 12-foot lane to travel. But then working with TPW and their feedback, they did express an interest to have wider shoulders. So rather than having 2 or 3 foot shoulders, they wanted to see 4-foot shoulders. So what you see on this plan actually is consistently throughout the limits of the project, 10-foot lanes for through traffic and turning traffic, and then 4-foot shoulders in both the northbound and southbound directions. And what that does is the additional 4 feet of shoulder that can help with bicycle travel, should someone choose to ride a bike out here. But also it helps with drainage. So if there's in a heavy rainstorm condition, that the water that's running along the gutter does not spill out into the through travel lanes. So there are a lot of benefits. And if there is a need to pave a section of the road in the future, there would be additional width within the shoulders to be able to make up travel lane width. So you don't have to create a lot of detours. So there are a lot of benefits with having the 4-foot shoulders while still preserving the traffic calming potential that you get with the 10-foot lanes. So that's the cross section that we have here. We have preliminarily reviewed that with Public Works. And again, we'll continue to review it with them as we go through the design process. This is past the Marathon School driveway heading north towards Hilltop Road, and then Grove Street is farther beyond the shade. This is where you have the trees and the wooded area on the right side as you're heading north with guardrail protection. So what you see at the bottom with the cross section is that the widening, which is the right side of the road, just 10 feet or less of widening can accommodate the turn lanes that we need, the longer turn lanes that we need in the southbound direction. But we would need to relocate the guardrail or put in a new guardrail, some slope modifications. But all of that can again still be completed within the public right of.
Could we go back to the previous, can I talk about the light control?
Yes, yeah,
Okay.
that's the next
Great.
slide that
Thank
Chris
you.
was showing. So this is a zoomed in view of what is referred to as a traffic signal layout. So those little triangular shapes that you see in the middle of the road are actually signal heads, and they're pointing in different directions. So there is that line that you see in the middle. You can point to that, Chris, the mast arm. Yes. So that's a 45-foot, 40-foot mast arm that sticks over the street. So it's 40 feet long with two signal heads pointing to the northbound traffic, 3 signal heads pointing to the southbound traffic, and then 2 signal heads pointing towards the Marathon School Drive. And then in addition to that, there is the pedestrian crosswalk there at that intersection would have push button actuated control so that when a pedestrian pushes the button, all traffic is stopped. So what is currently accomplished with the crossing guard can actually be done with a fully actuated traffic signal. So, and that feature would be available throughout the day. It's not just for the hour of or hour and 20 minutes or however long the crossing guard is available today. That's the only time when that full protection is available for crossing the street. But with a fully actuated traffic signal, this would provide a safe crossing location halfway in between the 2 existing signals that are out there, which are 1 mile apart at this point. So this provides a convenient midway point between the 2 existing signals for pedestrians to cross from the west side of Hayden Row onto the east side to get to the Marathon School, and then can walk along the Marathon School driveway and along the internal connection to get to the new school as well.
And line H here is the service, the driveway.
Right. So the driveway for the property across the street, because they fall within the zone of influence of that traffic signal, they would have signal indications as well. So they'll be able to function within the phasing of the traffic signal, and they'd be able to enter and exit with full traffic signal control, as if they were the Marathon School driveway.
And what would trigger that?
So there would be sensors that would be located, and we have to still figure out what type of technology Public Works would like for traffic signal actuation. You could have in-pavement sensors, or you could have camera-based detection. So there could be a camera sitting on the mast arm, and it would sense vehicles in all 4 directions. And when there is a vehicle that's approaching or waited for a certain number of seconds, then the light would turn green for that approach, and they would process. And then once the queue is cleared up, then the light turns red and it goes to serve the other directions.
Now, right next to that house, it's right across from the Marathon driveway. It's 136, as I recall. And then you have Chamberlain Street. Is the light somehow going to accommodate those people trying to get out? Is it going to make it better, worse?
So that's a common question that comes up. Obviously, when you consider traffic signal control, it does not make sense to put traffic signal control at every unsignalized.
No, I understand
So
that.
what we have done in this instance is identify one key location where you could provide signal control. And in this case, it's the Marathon School driveway. But when that light turns red, that stops. For example, think about traffic heading both northbound and southbound. And as the queue is cleared, the light turns red for Hayden Row Street, and then the traffic from Marathon driveway starts moving. That's when Chamberlain Street
Has a
and the
break?
curb cut, they have a break in the through traffic flow that doesn't exist today. Today, the traffic flows, whenever they can move without the crossing guards interrupting the traffic flow. That 1 mile corridor, traffic has free flow conditions in those.
Yeah, I understand they don't have it now. The gentleman at 136 asked about that when we were on a sidewalk earlier. We just want to make sure that we're making it better for them, not worse.
The operations for the curb cuts closest to the intersection are likely going to be better than the unsignalized condition. And then you would expect that same kind of beneficial operations for other curb cuts as well. When the traffic is interrupted, and if you take a typical speed on this corridor is about 38 miles per hour, 39 miles per hour. If you stop a vehicle that's traveling at that speed, it takes, again, when the light turns green, it takes time for those vehicles to get back to those speeds.
Yeah.
So that provides actually a lot
Right.
more breaks in traffic than what's happening today. So that's a beneficial effect. I mean, you don't put up traffic signals for speed control, but a beneficial secondary benefit in this case is the speed control that you can have.
Is there value to striping a line where Chamberlain and Hayden Row Street meet, or like don't block the box?
That's-
Marking?
That's typically done as well. And again, it's a DPW preference, it's town standards. If the town of Hopkinton has interest in trying that out, that's definitely something that could be used. So you essentially stripe a box in the pavement on Hayden Row Street, says do not block the box. So traffic heading north, when the light, let's say if the light's red and the traffic's coming up, that would provide an indication that the traffic should not go stop in that striped area blocking Chamberlain Street. The effectiveness of or the enforcement of that, or how effective it is in terms of drivers following it, is something that depends on the driver behavior, but having that would definitely help.
And as we do these discussions with DPW going forward, I know Vinod, you said it's a sort of a DPW preference. It's something that we've discussed with some of the neighbors there, and it should be a strong push to do it. And so, let me know when those conversations are happening, because it seems like it's very little investment for the potential benefit that it could provide.
Sure.
Yep. What can be done with the traffic signals that would reduce the impact of the neighbors at night? In other words, they're gonna see red lights, yellow lights, green lights. Is there any need for that after school hours, for example? I'm trying to think of it, the people that are right there at that intersection.
So there are time-based traffic signals, like, after a certain time of the day, they can go into flashing. I mean, you can't turn off the signals fully, but they can go into flashing, but that provides an added level of, I would say, nuisance. If you had like flashing lights, that's a lot more intrusive than having steady lights. But what I would say in this instance is, once the school's done, let's say, 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock, after school activities, everything's done, there is really no reason for the light to be triggered unless a pedestrian pushes the button or an occasional car comes out of the driveway or something. So the light can stay green on the main line. It doesn't need to cycle through all phases. It just stays green on Hayden Row Street. And there are certain filters or there could be directional technologies that can be built into the lens that doesn't have the glares spreading out in the sides.
Yeah, there's a new intersection over in Upton. And when I'm going left to go to, actually it's heading towards Westboro, you have to be in a certain spot exactly to see that green light. If you're further back or a little bit too close, you can't see it. That's the kind of thing we need.
There's a programmable lenses and they're used quite often.
That way, the neighbors don't get that.
I mean, that's something we could look at in this instance and see
look
if
at
it's an
that.
application.
That'll be a good thing, because that'll be, this whole traffic signal itself is gonna be the biggest hurdle for us. If we can accommodate them the best we can, it'd be great.
Yeah, the other thing with going into a flash mode is that the pedestrian buttons would not be functional at that point. For the pedestrian buttons to work, the light should be on continuously. So if there's a need, if someone wants to walk through the school, at 6 p.m., they should be able to benefit from the push button actuated signal and then be able to cross the street. So for that reason, I would suggest that there not be a flashing mode in the nights, but a programmable lens like what you mentioned.
lens
is something.
Nights, weekends, summer. You know, there's a lot of days when those lights could probably stay somewhat stagnant.
Go to the next slide. I think that, yeah, that covered all of the things. So I did want to close with a few notes that I think what is the alternative or why a traffic signal? So traffic signal installation is driven by federal standards. So it's not something that we would go out or anybody would go out and just install it on desire. It needs to meet certain thresholds. There are certain requirements that need to be met. And even when they're met, there needs to be engineering judgment that backs up the installation of a traffic signal. So we went through that process in this instance, and we felt that, especially during the peak hours, there would be a need for a traffic signal at the Marathon School driveway to handle the future traffic flow. It would not only help the two schools, but it'll also, as we talked about it, the curb cuts and unsignalized intersections along the corridor as well. The variation or an alternative, I guess, is what I listed there as item number 5. If you did not consider a traffic signal, it doesn't mean that you don't need the geometry. You would still need the roadway widening, because that's what helps with the queue stack. So it's not like, you don't do the traffic signal, then you don't get the widening. You'd still need to do the roadway widening for the capacity. And all you would end up with likely is the need for police details as opposed to crossing guards to control traffic during the peak times, an hour and a half in the morning, an hour and a half in the evening, to be able to control that intersection functioning as a traffic signal. If you didn't put up a full traffic signal, that's likely the scenario that you would be looking at once the traffic flows and the enrollment growth happens in the future. That's all I had.
Okay. Questions from the committee, please.
Amanda's the limit of the microphone, John.
All right, I'll speak. But if we could just talk about the right, the new driveway. Or...
I just remember. Oh, good to see you. Because I live in town, so I've seen you in a couple.
Yeah, like we're on next month.
All right, I get that.
If you can go, I actually think it's the next one, Chris, is site layout. Yeah. So you're talking about the roundabout and the cross connection to Marathon School versus coming out at the new driveway.
Correct. Like
So-
what percentage do we think of our Charleswood students live south?
So, yeah, it's not just traffic living south. I guess it's also work traffic, right? So parents drop off the students and then they come out and they're not going back home, they're going to work. So we looked at that extensively during the traffic study, not only for Marathon School, but we looked at all of the school driveways up and down the corridor. And what we've identified is a 60-40% split. So about 40%, again, it's not precise, but about 40% of the traffic is oriented south, or 60% is oriented north towards Main Street. So
when the school lets out, so the 40% that say Forest Drive to then come out and blend with 100% of Marathon, they're probably not going to go through the connector, even to go right. You know what I mean? Like all of the Marathon traffic and some percentage of Charlotte traffic will come.
So we did run more recently as part of the site plan development for this project. We spent quite a bit of time. I mean, I didn't get into that as part of this presentation because this was mostly Hayden Road Street, but we looked at the geometry of each of those internal roadways. And when you look at the site plans that's been submitted prepared as part of the project, you'll actually see turn lanes and flares and widening. There are geometric variations, so it's not just two parallel lines defining both edges of those internal streets. There's actually geometry on those driveways to accommodate the estimated traffic flow between the schools. So there is geometry there, and we've actually identified that the roundabout would actually be a better treatment for that internal intersection than a T intersection with stop sign. Just given the amount of traffic that would be processing at that intersection. So we did look at that closely, and I'm sure as we go through the site plan review process, we'll probably be getting into more of that discussion as well.
I have a question on bullet point number 2 on the stacking. 18 plus buses, assuming buses come in 2 waves, is there a scenario where they wouldn't come in 2 waves?
Currently, they're shared by the 2 schools. And so you would need enrollment growth to grow to the point that each school needed its own fleet of buses, which is a lot of enrollment growth.
Because the schools would be dismissing and starting at the same time, you would take the fleet and drop and pick up and switch. And again, because we have that internal cross, it's the most efficient as opposed to now where we go back out onto Hayden Row and back into a school.
So I understand there've been some adjustments to start and stop times for some of the schools up in this area. Is there more that needs to be done, or do you feel pretty good about where you are now? Well, obviously, when the new school comes in, we'll have to make another adjustment. But
So the only thing that we have changed right now is for Hopkins, we drop off all the students there first. Parents were very concerned about their students getting to class with enough time, whereas Marathon School, because of supervision, do not let the kids off the buses until all teachers are prepared to receive their kids. So it's a very different climate between Hopkins and Marathon. So that's where we allow the Hopkins buses to arrive and drop earlier than we ever would at Marathon. So when we go to Marathon Elmwood, I imagine we'll go back to the waiting for the supervision.
But all 36 buses have coming from each direction will go through that rotary.
Yes.
And cross along with the parents' rotary.
And the one thing I wanted to mention about bus stacking, again, yeah, the numbers we modeled were based on what we got from the school district, but there's enough geometry that's being proposed both on Hayden Row Street with the turn lanes, the extended turn lane at the signal, and then the turn lane that goes to the new driveway, but also all of the circulation on site. That can more than adequately handle the traffic that you would expect to use or go to the new school, and whatever goes to Marathon, obviously, that projection, we also projected that to the future. So I think from a physical space perspective, I think there's room to accommodate the buses. But again, we just modeled what we had for the analysis.
To kind of build on Amanda's concern, Amanda, I think because of the timing of kids loading buses, a lot of the parents will have cleared the rotary by the time the buses are getting ready to make their descent through. So, so we're waiting for all the buses to load and then they release. Those parents are already picking up their kids and driving out. So I think there'll be some, but I think there'll be less than what your thought is right now. Everybody's leaving at the same time and converging on the circle. I think
You're going to have some, let's call it queue evolution. As parents learn how this all works, you'll have everyone coming in this driveway and they'll be going down, and it may be that a better solution for Marathon is to have the Marathon parents all get shoveled in, go around the rotary, and the Marathon parents come back and queue here because they have this whole length to build up. And the Elmwood or the Charleswood parents would have this whole length to queue, which is substantial compared to anywhere else on site. The one thing that I think Vinod's team is really going to have to look closely at is that we don't get to the point where they queue beyond this point or they queue beyond this point, because this cross connect could become narrow and the buses wouldn't be able to circulate past the parents.
So one thing we did look at, again, is obviously this is all based on the modeling and the projections that we have. And this is 10 years out in the future with the growth and everything else. So what you see here is there are no physical limitations on any of the turns, even that no left turn coming out of the new driveway. It's just something we're suggesting at this point because traffic has the ability to use the signal. But once the school is up and running, and let's say 6 months or a year down the road, as most schools do, there is a revisit of the traffic flow and circulation. There's almost always some adjustments that need to happen. And we start with a certain circulation plan, and there would need to be tweaks. So as long as the plan that we are building doesn't preclude adjustments in the future, because that's the toughest thing. Like if you design it so a certain turn that cannot happen, and then it would be that much more of a hassle to restore that in the future. So we're designing this so that there's enough flexibility to have those changes happen 6 months, a year down the road based on actual operations. And expect the school would probably go through that process.
That's a good point. Yeah,
Yeah.
there are a lot of choices here.
Yeah.
So I apologize for interrupting the traffic conversation, which can continue, but I did want to note, unfortunately, as I mentioned, I'm going to have to drop early to catch a flight. Tiffany Ostrander is on the meeting right now, and I think actually will be at the middle school shortly. So we do still have a quorum. But thank you, everyone.
Thanks, John.
Good night, John.
Is there anything else on traffic questions? Just a name and.
Sure, yeah, Mike Christini, 136 St. Rose Street. I had a question pertaining to the left-hand turn lane into 147. I guess it's the new entrance to the school.
Yep.
You mentioned about future-proofing that entrance or not using the roadway that you may be able to use in front of 136. What would be the criteria for extending the turn lane into the new entrance?
Chris, if you could go back to that slide that shows the middle section, I guess. So you're talking about that yellow striped area in the middle?
We did a great site walkthrough today, but this is the left-hand turn lane into the new entrance is a concern of stacking there. And then if you were to use those dashed lines, that seems quite cumbersome. So it's a little out of my league in terms of knowledge.
So,
I'm curious.
yeah, right now we don't see, at least based on the projected analysis, there is no need to stripe that yellow splashed area for turn lane, and that's why we're actually showing it as gold and not as a turn lane. And really the time when that left turn at the new driveway gets used is, let's say there is a parent or there's a long line of cars, parents going to the marathon school, and then car 5 or car 6 is heading to the new school. They don't necessarily need to wait at the signal to turn into the signalized intersection and then use the cross connection. They can use the pipe, the through lane, and then use the left turn pocket farther down to enter the new driveway. And based on our modeling, the length of the turn lane was designed to accommodate the longest queue that we expect to be there, which is that length that you see there for that
And it's
left.
presently designed as 8 cars, and the present day marathon is designed as 5 to 6. Do I have that right?
Present day marathon is about 4 to 6 or 5 to 6 cars. Would be more than doubling that. It's about 130 to 150 feet today. The new length north of the signal.
Comparing the present day marathon at 5 to 6 to the proposed design of the new entrance to the school at 8 cars.
It's more than 8 cars.
I think it was 8 cars on this side, Vinod. I think this side's 20, isn't it?
Yeah, it's much longer. At the signal, we'd have a much longer turn lane just because that would be the first preference. But we just wanted to have the ability for parents to use the unsignalized driveway if they choose to do that. But yeah, that's about 8 to 10 cars. It's probably more than 8, but yeah, it's somewhere in that order.
But it's a good amount of distance on that side, whereas compared to this is cut in about half between the two slides. So it's at least 18, maybe 20 cars.
For 400 feet, you're probably looking at somewhere in the order of 18 cars.
Okay, so thank you. That makes a lot of sense.
Other questions on traffic as I cover for Tiffany before she becomes official chair? We talked with the residents during the walk about the value that that gives them, because one of the early concerns that we heard was that going to get your mail can be quite the ordeal. And so by pulling back the shoulder and pulling back the mail delivery point, you can actually stand at the mailbox and grab your mail, and you've got a couple of feet behind you before you're in the roadway, which is an improvement over what they currently have. Any other questions on traffic? So our next series of items all relate.
Great.
Next series of items all relate to where we are in the overall project. So last week I distributed to the full committee the design development set. So you could see the design that Perkins has developed. What we're going to talk through now is where the cost estimates ended up, where we are from an overall budget standpoint, and also where we are versus where we were from a value engineering standpoint versus where the drawings are now, and some of the choices and options that the committee has in front of them. So starting with the design development estimates, we are under budget. We had Ann Fogarty and PM&C both estimate the project. We met last Wednesday to reconcile, and at the tail end of that reconcile, we were within 1%. That says $1 million, but that is less than 1%. So we were able to reconcile at 122,488,967 versus PM&C's 123,507,195. The MSBA has us use the designer's estimate as sort of the estimate of record. So at this point, the estimate would be $706 per square foot. And if you recall from the town meeting, that means that we have dropped from town meeting by about, I have to do math wrong, I had $8 a square foot in terms of the size of the building, which is a good amount. Officially, the estimate has two alternates. One alternate is to drop the number of wells by 10 wells. Currently, we have 120 600-foot wells as part of the project. CMTA is doing an analysis currently to confirm that that drop in 10 wells works, but based on the information we received at the Hopkins project, the test well that we did there, it does appear reasonable that we will be able to drop by that number of wells. They did not object, but sort of qualified their response that they're continuing to review it. It is not necessary to take that deduction tonight. We are under budget, so the committee does not have to take it, but it is an option to take that alternate in the event that we wanted to bring the overall construction budget lower. The second alternate was something that we would be revisiting, which was the suggestion for an occupied roof outside the art room. If I just click back, it would be the area with the railing right under management. And that would be $228,000, 783 to add that. You have to speed up. To add that back into the project. So I wanted to just take a look at where we were with sustainable schematic design alternates back when we were doing the value management prior to the bid. So what you can see here in sort of dark blue are the accepted alternates that we made at that point, and what you can see in the, bear with us as we address our power issue. We're going to be just barely too short. All right. And then in the dark blue are the ones that the committee decided to accept. So just to revisit those 8 alternates, the ones that we accepted was we wanted to try and keep the tile in the corridors, but we didn't want to raise the budget in order to do so. We wanted to use just stone dust at the overflow parking to save $200,000. We wanted to remove irrigation from the playing fields, and we wanted to raise the grade at the playing field to lose some more loam to keep the cost down. After looking at where we ended up with the drawings, we obviously, the first 2 that are underlined there are the ones that we have for you to consider that were estimated in this cycle. So at the time, we were comfortable with the 120 wells, but it does appear from the initial information we've seen at the Hopkins School, we may have opportunity to lower that again. That adds up to the $500,000 that I just described. We had looked at 2 different options other than just keeping the current base bid scheme, which is just a roof, not an occupied roof. And that was to do a green roof or an occupied roof, both of which were rejected at the time. But Perkins did add in an alternate to look at the option of restoring that occupied roof if the committee wished to do so. They also were able to fit within the project the ceramic tile in the corridors. So we did not put FRP in the corridors, and we were able to bring it in under budget. Ashley at Traverse felt that she wanted to try and fit the plastic lattice work for the green parking area so that you could grow grass instead of just stone dust there. So she did include that in the design development, but we had said to go with stone dust, so that was a difference of about $144,000 at the SD budget stage. With the space that we have at this, oh, I'm sorry, I'm reading the wrong. That was the 233 at the SD budget stage. With the space that we have, we could upgrade to the more robust system of concrete lattice work and plant grass in that. And the concern that the committee expressed at the time that we made that decision was that the plastic sometimes can be pulled up by plows, and it's usually held in by stakes. So that first time that the plow hits it is the last time it looks nice without substantial effort to sort of flatten it back out, which was a contributing factor in the decision that the committee made to not pursue that at the time. But if the committee wanted to revisit that discussion, I don't know if I put the price here or not. We could dig up what that is, and it does appear, I saw the number yesterday, I just don't remember what it is. It does appear that we have budget room to pursue the lattice work and grow grass there rather than have a large stone dust lot, if the committee was interested in that. And the last one was the committee discussed the possibility of raising the grade at the field. It created some issues where you'd have a few more steps up to that level, but we are getting rid of a lot of loam with the almost 3-foot depth of loam throughout the site. So it does provide a considerable credit at that $243,000. At this time in the design development drawings that you're looking at, that is not included in the base bid of the documents. So if the committee wished to re-pursue that option, that's still on the table, just like any of the other options that I highlighted here remain on the table for the committee to consider. We can revisit that in a second, but overall, you're $1.4 million under budget for the construction number. So at this time, we're seeing no change in the technology or the FF&E numbers. Of the contingency that we've used, we've only really tapped 0.5% of it for various change orders that the committee's voted on over the course of the project through design development. And so we still have $909 basically $9.9 million, almost $10 million in contingency remaining in the project, and we're 1.5 under budget. So with that information, I would open it up to the committee to consider whether they would want to revisit any of those VE discussions at this time. I have all the VE sheets from before queued up if we want to look at a specific issue.
I would assume regarding alternate number one, the wells, that once they drill the first real well up behind the school, we're gonna know how many wells we're gonna need at that point.
Correct.
So why would we take a chance to cut it down? I don't see any point.
So where it becomes challenging is the, we would have to pursue it as a unit price, which is an awkward unit price to develop, because there's a lot of logistics involved in the actual drilling of the well. While Hopkins is pursuing a CM at risk, we made that decision on that project because it's an occupied building, we're pursuing a GC bid. So your ability to work with the contractor and the driller is less than in sort of the open book CM process. There's also a lot of complications in terms of layers that go on in that playground area. You have a mix of the new playground surfacing, the roadways, the drainage, and the wells that are all pushed tightly together. So you do have a lot of complexity going on back there, and fewer wells would reduce that complexity.
I just think at this juncture, so obviously we have money to do it. And the fact that at some point, scary enough it is to say this school will require an addition. We're probably gonna need that extra well space at some point. It's already in the budget. Why not just leave it? Worst case scenario is work with the contractor and say, hey, you're gonna need 10 wells less. Will you take care of it? No, I won't. Okay, do the 10 wells, we'll use it.
And you do have 2 more budget cycles.
Yeah, I don't see any point right now in taking that off the table. I like the idea. I like the work you did. Don't get me wrong. And it probably is gonna be the same thing as Hopkins. Hopefully. And then, that's why clear it now? Just, that's all I'm saying.
So I'm a little confused on, you say it'll be difficult to remove it or difficult to get a bid because we're not sure exactly.
It'd be difficult to get a appropriate credit for this. Oh, it would be almost impossible.
Yeah,
because-
your general contractor is gonna bid this as a lump sum bid. Whereas a CM, you're purchasing a service where they're bidding it out component by component. So at Hopkins, we could adjust the number of wells because the CM is acting as a service of the owner to procure a driller to just do that scope of work. The GC is giving you a price to, at the end of the day, give you a building. And so the negotiation of that credit is difficult to get the same value that it would be from a bidding situation.
It could have worked the other way. If we needed 10 more wells.
Similar, think go just the other way, Bill.
Yeah.
He gets you on the other side. Because in the GC format, they don't have to share anything with us. So we're gonna say, no, it's $32,000, and he's gonna say, oh, $58,000, and then he's gonna, so there's no way we know what they're actually really paying for it unless we do a unit price, which becomes complicated because the unit price is tied into a whole bunch of different things like this. I agree with Mike. I think you should leave them in because your tendency is to grow. Your building will probably grow, and I think
Many is way better than nothing.
you have 10 extra wells here.
It'll be cheaper.
Just trying to drill into everywhere to
It'll be
get
cheaper
it.
now than 5 years ago.
So.
Unless we get our own rig.
Stuff at 60 or 90, we need. It's good to know that it's there.
Thank you, sir. I'll get going. Thank you, everyone. So talk about.
As far
What's-
as like, just running the other wells at less capacity, correct?
Correct. Yep. So they're each divided into circuits, but you're consistently flowing all the water through all the wells. So the more wells you have, the more manageable temperature fluctuations of the water.
Yeah.
Better.
Thank you. Everyone have a question?
Yes, Chris, my question is, the $527,000, what percentage is that of the total cost of the geothermal work?
It is, we have 120 wells and we're dropping 10, so it's like 8%. So when you run it from a pure numbers standpoint, if you recall, Jig Group, we had a little table that we circulated with you where we described the contingencies that we had put into the wells and various ratings that we had got. So GZA at the time had given us their rough estimations of the amount of feet it would take to do a certain number of wells for local sites and sort of their mass average for all sites that they've done in Massachusetts. And then there was the more conservative number that CMTA gave us. What we found is that the Hopkins well, from a performance standpoint, was very close to the Massachusetts average. And we found that the depth of granite bedrock, or what we believe to be granite bedrock from the borings, was very similar. I think it was anywhere from 3 to 8 feet deep at Hopkins, and it was somewhere in the neighborhood of like 8 to 12 feet at the Elmwood site. But whereas the Hopkins site was 4 to 7 feet down for groundwater, in some cases we found groundwater at about 7 inches on the Elmwood site. And so taking that mass average, we had calculated at the time in all of our back and forth that it was equivalent to about 108 wells. And that was including a 30% contingency in that calculation. So that 30% to a certain degree allows CMTA, the engineer, to keep a narrower water temperature fluctuation, which avoids glycol and other things. But even with that extra 30% added in there, we were still 10 wells too many.
Okay.
But it's also a decision we can make because it's just sort of like cutting the piping or like trimming a circuit. We can make that much later in the process and still get the same.
Yeah, I think my suggestion is I agree that we should keep it, not remove the 520,000, because even with the 110 wells that we do need, given that we are dealing with the ground and natural soils, there's always that uncertainty, especially given that we have not drilled at this site. Just accounting for any surprises. It's not a big number, and you know, it's good to leave that buffer.
Okay. The next one was the occupied roof. I know, Tim, you weren't a huge fan of that when we discussed it back in.
Not either. I don't even know where that came from. Why we keep looking?
Yeah, we looked at that at another school, and, you know, I mean, other than like this notion that things will seed themselves and some plants will overtake other plants, like those kinds of things that they had mentioned that kids were learning in that other place. I don't know that we saw anything else.
There was a few, in this particular location, you're right off the art room. So they'd have the chance to take the kids outside on what would be the roof of the second floor. So from the third floor, they could open the art room door and they'd have an outdoor space there. Perkins added it as an alternate. I looked at the end of John's
Look at me. If I were gonna do one of the, if I were gonna do one of these two things, I would do the green roof. If I were gonna choose one of the two.
A lot of maintenance. Right.
So they claim they're maintenance free.
Yeah.
So I've seen her.
The other piece, if you make it a green roof, it limits your ability to throw solar panels up there as well.
Yeah, the thing with this location is it's right, you're looking out on it. So it's one of these locations where you're in a space and you're looking out at this, basically this white PVC roof, which you probably won't put panels on that spot, this low area. That's why we sometimes go with a green roof, because it's a little bit nicer to look at. It deadens that kind of bright bounce of that sunlight into those roofs. But
So the 228 is the flat roof with ability to walk out there.
Pavers and guardrail.
Okay,
Yeah,
and
open
then
and
the green
door.
is more or less. I know I saw it on my slide earlier today.
Bear with me for one.
I like things on my roofs.
I'm not gonna make any, I'm not gonna say anything about the door that goes out to that either. Tell you right now.
I'm trying to find the link.
So when we discussed this in schematic design, we discussed the, there we go.
Yeah, that's east, that's east.
But I have the wrong,
It's a picture.
Yes,
sharing
that's
the
what we
wrong
said.
Yeah, that's
slide.
pretty close.
Yeah.
Dandelions,
So,
dandelions.
So
Jim's
the-
gonna cut it.
Zoom don't have nearly the view that the rest of us do.
Special machine.
now,
So the idea was that it was about 100,000 to do a green roof, and at the time it was 244 to do an occupied roof with pavers and the ability to go out there. So if it just remained a white roof, or you could really give a number of colors you can choose. You can go gray if you're worried
you
about
will, if
glare.
you're going for the lead point, you gotta,
It's gonna be white, doesn't it? Yeah. So
or the green roof works for that too. Oh, yeah, it isn't in there now. It just isn't in the project. Either one of them. It's just, I think, just a white roof, right?
Same.
Without.
Right.
It's hard to hear whoever's speaking.
and could you just pull that a little closer to yourself?
Well, I'll repeat. I'll repeat what Tiffany said. She wanted to know if the white roof was going to create a radiant heat within the adjacent classroom.
It usually just becomes a light problem because the triple pane
More
windows
of a
do a
glare
good
issue.
job of filtering. Whether the light's coming up or the light's coming down, they're not like polarized. So it rarely creates that issue of a glare. I mean, it does, and it can focus it. Like you hear all sorts of crazy stories, like newfangled buildings creating a hot spot that like catches a car on fire every once in a while. So there is the possibility. Oh, you've never heard that story. I got a story for you later. But you certainly get weird lighting effects because you're more likely to concentrate lighting within the room.
And besides, we have all those Eclipse glasses left over.
There's typically there's a tint on the windows anyway that would stop a glare.
There is a tint on the windows, yes.
I think it's if you were trying to look out
Yeah,
at
if
the.
you're looking out at it, it's,
Yeah.
You're doing your impression.
Be bright, don't look out the window.
So I'm hearing a consensus to move away from this one.
Had the same discussion on Marathon, by the way, 5 years ago.
We put solar panels on that roof, Mike.
Um, If you're looking out the window of that art room, say you could walk out onto that roof, what would you be looking down at?
parking lot.
Well,
Mm-hmm.
that seals the deal for me.
The trees off in the distance,
And-
because you're the third story.
Yeah, in a lot of ways, it would be better if that was in the back of the building where you can. be
Yeah,
looking out to the-
exactly. I mean, I think
Versus
that might
that.
be inspiration to our young parking lot. It's not.
So the next one was I think everybody's consensus at SD was to fit the tile in, and Perkins was able through efficient decisions to be able to do that. So I think that's a win for the project. The overflow parking. I know there was a lot of strong feelings about the stone dust back in when we discussed this versus the flat deck, but it does raise the question of whether we want to consider. Just grab that from before, because I believe we discussed it. So at the time, it was a $390, or it was $400,000 ad for the lattice paver. So considering that we are still at the plastic grid, that's probably an equivalent ad, maybe a little less because I think the area is less now than it was then. But it was still a fairly significant savings to go to the dense grade. The concern raised about the plastic was that we have seen instances where as the dust or the soil gets spread and you begin to expose the plastic, if you're plowing that lot, then you have the potential to rip it all up. If you decided, well, no, I want to pave that lot, it does complicate the MIPA submission that we're currently working on because we're trying to stay within a certain amount of impervious area. So you are limited in sort of what you can pursue here. The question is whether you want to keep the plastic grid system or go back to the stone dust moving forward.
Or go up to the concrete.
Or go up to the concrete.
2 years from now, okay. Separate project.
I think you have to wait more than 2 years. And this is a publicly noticed meeting that is capable of being viewed by anyone. In MIPA.
This is what.
Stone dust.
Stone dust.
The reason is even maintenance on the concrete lattice. So we use salt in town. And that'll eat right through that lattice and it kills any kind of grass that would grow in between anyway. So stone dust is really the way to go. It's easy to kind of fix and maintain.
You can fix.
And we can fix
You
it.
got the machine.
We have the machine. Yeah.
No brainer. I gotta move this along.
What are we gonna get? There is a Bruins game.
Missed one meeting.
I think there's one more.
So we got a solution.
The last one was the restoring the additional grade. There is 3 feet of depths of loam that we have not laboratory tested to confirm anything about it yet. So you have a lot of loam that you need to export as part of this project.
Spent a fortune getting rid of loam at Marathon.
So-
If we could use it here, as opposed to shipping it, it went to New Hampshire or some crazy.
I forget, you mentioned we voted against it because of steps that would have to be.
No, you
added.
actually voted for it.
Okay.
And it was not included in the design. That's why we're bringing it up, because you voted for it at schematic design. And the design kept the bid grade in what they're currently proposing. And we are preparing the planning board submissions and the Concom submissions and everything else. So we want to restore that decision that the ESBC made. Now would be the time.
So does this 243,492 include the ramps, railings and all the other stuff that are gonna be required, are gonna be needed probably to do this?
I thought they had a way around that when we discussed it at the time, but it was never developed, so we don't know. I think you're gonna pay more getting rid of it than you will accommodating the increase over the amount of distance you have available to you.
Yeah, because you would theoretically want to raise that whole, everything out.
Yeah, it's the
You want
whole
to raise,
plan.
it's not just the field. You're gonna basically raise the road, the field, all of it to try to, a little bit, like basically 6 inches across the whole place.
But you can't
Versus
do
trying to
that.
go 3 feet up on the field, because then you're gonna create these, other maintenance problems with ramps, railings and other things that you're gonna need.
And there may be
Now.
scenarios where you can't raise it with loam because you
There
need
may be,
drainage
because you'll
planes
need
or other things.
On
And
the
that
roads,
loam,
you can't use that.
what I can tell you is that loam loves water and it's like a magnet for it. Having walked that site on wet days many, many times in the last few months.
That was all pasture and fields. I mean, the loam was gotta be a foot deep. What it was a Marathon, same field.
It's it is very clearly 3 feet deep. And of that 3 feet, about 2.5 feet is water currently. So,
Right, so, we could look at strategies to do something here. I think just raising the field grade is, we need to think more about that.
there may be
It's not-
berming or something else that we can look at to better control
That
water.
worries me only because you're creating this plateau thing that's out there that's kind of It's almost like you're getting rid of a pile of dirt, which I've done on other projects, which looks strange. 'Cause you got a pile of dirt.
Are we getting rid of just loam or fill as well?
Loam, we've got lots and lots and lots of. loam.
Yeah,
So I think we'll probably find places for fill.
There's not a market for loam. I understand.
In the GC world, there's never a market for loam.
there's a lot of loam.
It's
I think it's gonna depend on testing too and what it costs to get rid of it.
what you could do with it.
In the landscape world, there's not a demand for loam.
Well, out of the.
There is.
They gotta do the testing. We have to
Yeah.
do that. And for example, the loam that was at Marathon, McIntyre couldn't have. Because that loam had to go to New Hampshire, some nasty.
Nitrates, all kinds of stuff, pesticides, all kinds of stuff in there from it being.
To a certain degree, you have to amend it.
Research, let these guys look at the grades.
That scenario is to try to kind of spread it around. I mean, it seems like a lot, and it is a lot, but it's 6 or 8 inches on a site this big. You get rid of a lot.
How about we have loam day? People back up, pop themselves. Everybody in the town would see that.
Is desperate for it, and
I-
it costs a fortune to bring it, and every project like this.
I have a project that's trying that right now, and it's not working.
You have to see. The state is
That was his idea. He said, hey, Bill, tell him about that.
One pickup truck at a time.
I showed up with his pickup truck, and I want this much. He says, you're not taking this much.
Truck,
So I think we look at opportunities to lose that, but the one thing that we didn't take into account when this was proposed initially that I think is reasonable to bring up is if you look at the geotechnical report and the amount that soil is, or that water is draining through the soil, it does appear that the soil on site retains water a fairly large amount. And so that could just as easily create issues with, you know, you have a drainage system, but the water can't make it through the loam to get to the drainage system to dry out the field.
So I don't. Sure.
no drainage below. Yeah, it's all mentioned.
Tracking. If we leave the wells operating style already accommodated in the savings, or is it
tile?
gonna eat up that?
The tile is in the number currently now. The plastic lattice system is in the number currently now, so potentially that could be going down 200,000. The grade, raising the grade was to save money by not exporting loam. We did not do that currently in the number, so that would be a savings, provided it works out the way that we want. So the more loam we can lose on site, the less, eventually it inverts because moving it around and placing it has a cost too. So if you get too creative, you don't save yourself anything, but it made sense because we had a large field. But the latest geotech report reports that there's a number of drainage challenging issues with the soil that's on site. And so that has to be factored into this decision as well.
So in essence, you haven't touched it. It's actually gotten bigger.
There was also a few other items, just the committee's aware. I made mention to it earlier, but groundwater is at times at surface or 7 inches below through much of the site. With the rainy spring that we've had, management of water will be a considerable effort moving forward, as it doesn't appear on the drawings, but as a result of the geotechnical plan, we did add continuous waterproofing under 75 to 100% of the slabs, because water could be right. The underside, that waterproofing is expensive. But we did include that in the budget because of what we found in the geotechnical report. In a few areas, we will likely have a structural slab and not just a slab on grade, because when you have that much water, it creates hydrostatic pressure that pushes it up, which can create cracks from the underside instead of from the top down. And so that's just something for the committee to be aware of, but it is within the budget right now. So I think from a budget standpoint, we do believe that we're in a very good place. As I mentioned, from the MSBA's perspective, there's no need to change the budget at this time. We'll continue with the construction number that we have, continue with the technology and the FF&E numbers that we have. Really, the biggest movements have been the decisions that the committee has made so far. Last meeting's decision to bring on IDS as part of your commissioning effort went into a bucket within the budget. So financially, the project remains in a very healthy place. Life cycle cost, this is just, it's going to be part of the DD submission, so I wanted to bring it back out. I gave you all a copy of it. This largely revisits a lot of the things that we've discussed at length as part of this committee about how the ground source electric heat pump system that we're pursuing does have a high initial cost, but it's more than offset by the varying incentives that are out there, as well as the long-term operating costs. It produces a flatter curve over time because less maintenance, because so much of your cost is not in fuel that you need to bring in, but in the using the earth as the fuel source. Proprietary concerns. So as part of the mass procurement laws, you're typically asked to have 3 bidders for everything that you pursue in a public bid. The idea is to promote competition because that ultimately gives you the best price in the eyes of the state. That is very true, except that when you operate a large system, like let's say you're a DPW and you have things throughout town that are all the same make and model, you carry a lot less spare parts than if you had different things in every place. And so arguments like that are typically made for using proprietary materials. In the state of Massachusetts, you are permitted to use proprietary materials if the awarding authority makes a argument that those proprietary decisions are necessary, and in the case of a public body running a project, takes a vote to pursue those proprietary materials because it's in the awarding authority's best interest. In this case, it most likely relates to IT system hardware and to the locking system that the school system currently uses, because in the case of the IT system hardware, there's compatibility issues, there's established vendors that are already used in multiple campus buildings, and so that consistency is a valid argument. Same thing with the locking cores. It makes sense for Tim to have a single vendor to do all of his locks on campus so that he doesn't have to mix and match when he goes from one building to the next, allows consistent keying, and all of those are valid reasons. So the motion that we would look for from this committee today would be a motion to select these items as proprietary specifications moving forward in the project.
So moved.
Second.
So who actually drafts this document for the state? You guys?
When somebody asks, I'll be honest. It's literally it comes up in the RFI process where someone asks you and you say, this committee voted to use proprietary, we're not going to consider that. And if somebody wants to make sure that their bid isn't considered, then they'll make a huge fuss about how that's difficult. And then I'll send them a copy of these meeting minutes.
So you only need us.
I put it in the specs,
You don't
basically.
need the board of selectmen.
No, it's purely the committee on behalf of the school district is electing to use these because of functional necessities.
Is there anything that I assume is Josh on the IT for the town and the school?
It's a show for
It's a show.
the schools.
Okay. Is there anything they wanted to put on the list and Tim wanted to put on the list that didn't get on the list?
This is actually
No.
a pared down list
He
because
had
some of the
software
other,
on the list, which is not really something we usually put on these lists.
yeah, we took some stuff off because he's going to use preferred vendors because he has state contracts and other things that he can prepare. What we left on the list were the things that had the highest likelihood of ending up in the construction number. It may be that we don't actually pursue these in the construction number, but it's better to just get it out of the way. so that we don't have to revisit it if something changes.
So I understand the compatibility of doing all of this, but is there a realistic cost to isolating these things from a competitive standpoint?
It's gonna cost more. As soon as they know that you're gonna buy their thing and that's the thing, their price goes up.
Charge for whatever they want, but the cost savings is still the saving when something broke or something has to get fixed. That's where the savings come.
Like door hardware is one that comes up a lot. A lot of towns will decide to make door hardware proprietary because of the spare parts thing. It's, you know how everything works, you have fewer things you have to fix. You go, every building you go to has a different door hardware. Tim's argument on that was every building I have now has different door hardware. And so that's less of a convincing argument to make it worth paying more for your door hardware.
Paying to these specific brands, or are we saying we reserve the right? So between now and we purchase, if we should change our cameras, which we're not gonna do, but if something should change. in the next
If
year or
something would
two,
change, we could just
We'd
take
have to do
another
this
vote.
again, vote again.
Or you'd have the opportunity, if it was before bidding, you would have the opportunity to just write the spec different. You don't need to undo proprietary. You just have to make the vote if you want to do proprietary. So it doesn't preclude you from doing it a different way in the future. And it's the same thing when that RFI comes in and you're like, you know what, let me sell you on this thing. If you look at it and they make a convincing argument, as long as you advertise that as part of the bidding process, everyone bidding on the project knows the same thing, then you can make the change in just an addendum.
And I think I'm correct that PASIC has a lockdown on your key set, right? That's what I thought.
Interior and exterior.
I have experience with them, similar thing in a condo building. I know I figured that was the gig you had going.
It's a tough thing.
It is.
We're gonna need a vote.
Yes.
So I think, Mike,
I made a motion. Second by John. We need to vote.
First,
Sure, yes.
Mike, yes.
Nancy, can you hear me?
Nancy,
Tiffany, did you say my, yes, I'm a yes.
Jagrut,
Jagrut?
Yes. Yes.
and me.
Still 5-0 because John left, but Tiffany shut up. So the last thing that I wanted to touch on, we would make the recommendation that you meet again on May 14th. And we make that recommendation for a few reasons. One, that our invoice package goes to the MSBA usually around May 12th. And so I think that's probably good timing to hold a meeting so you can approve invoices and meeting minutes. But also because we're approaching the deadline or the earliest point that we could apply for or we could submit the I'm gonna get it right, the expanded ENF that we are submitting to the expanded EIR that we are submitting to kick off the MEPA process. So on March 17th, we put in what's called a 45-day notice. It's called a 45-day notice because most people submit after 45 days, but it's actually a 45-day to 90-day notice. So if you did want to push this, you certainly have that option, but MEPA can be an extended process, and sooner that we get it going, the sooner that we can put that behind us. That is the biggest factor in why the construction or the design contract documents period is so long, and that we would not be bidding until next April. Excuse me, next April at this point. So by submitting this, we'll kick off that process with the state. There's additional milestones, and I'm not the right person to tell you the details of all of those. But we can certainly have Claire join us or someone from LEC come on the 14th and run you through what to expect in the coming days with this. But we have done steps up until this point, such as holding our forum for the environmental justice community. We have been preparing the permitting submissions and background for the better part of the last month, and that'll continue for the next couple of weeks. And so I think on the 14th, we would bring you back a draft of that environmental impact. and have the committee vote, similar to what we're gonna ask you to vote, to authorize the chair to, for final decision on submitting that to the state. In the same time frame, we are using that same level of effort to prepare the Conservation Commission notice of intent and the planning board site plan approval applications. I think it's going to lag a little bit behind, but the process for Concom approval and planning board approval on this project pales in comparison to how long we're going to be dealing with NEPA. So I'm not concerned about that from a schedule perspective. One of the big factors in this is that with the town ballot occurring on May 20th, the planning board decided at the meeting we were at last night that they would instead move their meeting up 1 week. And I was banking on that week to be able to submit in enough time to have a productive discussion. And so that doesn't seem possible to have that meeting for this project in May. And so with the planning board not likely to be until June, it makes sense to just make sure that we're ready with NEPA with everything that we need, and then follow that up with the local approval process. And so I won't ask for that approval today. I think it makes sense if it works for the committee to come back on May 14th. I think that's a Tuesday, and we can vote on submitting that to NEPA at that time. So with that, that was the last large item that I had. We hope that you feel that we have covered the extent of the DD report and what we'll be submitting to the MSBA. There is an extensive amount of paperwork associated with it that Dan and ourselves are continuing to work towards getting all the T's crossed and the I's dotted. So we, as part of the MSBA's process, they do ask ESBC to vote to authorize us to submit the DD report. And so we would look for the committee to vote to authorize the chair to have final discretion in submission of the DD report, so that if there's any information that changes between now and Friday when we're scheduled to submit it, we would be able to resolve that without a future.
Motion.
I was like, do I have to repeat it? You're gonna move it.
I'm sitting close enough to the speaker so you can just listen to it.
River Kristen. So did you make the motion?
So it's,
I think you made the motion, Mike.
I did. You seconded.
you need a vice chair.
He's as accessible as I think I'll need him to be to accomplish this task.
This is pretty easy.
Bill,
Yes.
Mike,
Yes.
Nancy,
Nancy,
Yes. Yes.
Jagrut,
I am a yes.
yes,
Seattle.
that's
College.
And I believe that's,
I have one question while you're looking to see if we finally wrapped up. I appreciate the budget update and all the alternatives to consider. What should we expect for frequency of that kind of an update going forward?
so we, it doesn't go into, let me take a step back. So every month we provide, it's usually Susan, with what's called our vendor invoice package. And our vendor invoice package is made up of a number of things. It is all of the vendor invoices that have been entered into, or that we've received for payment and are recommending for payment. So as we move closer to construction, we'll start to have larger and larger invoice packages. So you'll start to receive those packages and you'll be voting on them, and there'll be, on this job, there'll be some big numbers in there when we're actually in construction. There's additional components to that vendor invoice package, and every municipality we work with has a different process for how they receive that information. Some committees like to receive it in full. Up until now, we've been submitting it to the district to consider, and they've been distributing the invoice sheet for the committee to vote on. The other components of that vendor invoice package are, we have a budget status update. So that looks similar to the project scope and budget agreement budget that you've seen. It's basically the exact same numbers. And what we do is we track the transfers in and out of those. We have a sheet that tracks the major contracts that have been entered into and any amendments to them or changes to them over time. As we get into procurement of FF&E and technology, we have a PO tracking sheet where we'll have purchase orders for all of, or whatever system the municipality uses, where we'll track which ones have been committed to, so that you have an idea of how much have you sort of committed to buy versus how many invoices you already paid. And it also includes a transfer log. Our budget status report has, I would pull one up if I have one handy, but I don't think I do. The budget status is the original budget, the transfers, the revised budget with those, the aggregate transfers. So it's not each individual, but it's all of them, to where the budget stands today. So one of the items we're submitting to the MSBA on Friday is to take the project scope and budget agreement, because we don't have the project funding agreement because of the delay from MEPA. And we're going to track the changes from that document to the where we stand right now. So like I highlighted the 0.5% of contingency as an example of that. So the contingency log is basically your roadmap. And in a lot of jobs, it's just I agreed to this contract, so I paid for it out of this, and that's all it is. Some jobs with multiple funding streams, it can become incredibly complex. I have a job right now with 14 different funding streams over 3 years. It's a long document. So we can certainly begin to distribute that to the entire committee if the committee wants what can be a massive file.
I was just referring to those couple of slides you had. It was just a quick look and I thought it was pretty helpful, but I understand not a lot's going to change for the next several months.
You won't see that again, that kind of thing, until 60% CDs when we do another estimate.
I think that's
the slide you're looking for. It's like, when do we know the construction number again, where we are?
And the
60%.
project budget status report that Chris just described is part of the vendor invoice packet that you all get. So if you go to the end of the packet, it's in there.
I did see that. 13
Line
pages.
by line, yeah.
But when we get into
Simplified it for us. So thank you.
when we get into construction, you're going to have like 120 pages for your schedule of values for the GC. It's going to be a lot of information. And so that's all that we had for this evening.
You moved what? Sure, that's absolutely.
Yeah. Call vote, Bill.
You have to vote. Yes, absolutely.
Nancy,
Yes.
DeGroot,
Yes.
Yes.
Have supper now.
Look at like, they're all, it's it. It's over.
Last time, all the powers ever concerned.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.